Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Matt Gardner, the host of Beyond Recovery. And today I have a guest by the name of Kim Clark. And she is working at a local recovery sobriety house here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. It's our house. And she's my guest today. Kim, how are you today?
I'm well, Matt. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for taking the time today. Very nice to meet you.
You as well.
Excellent. So, a few of the intentions I have today is obviously for you to champion what everything that you have going on at our house. I've been following you guys on Instagram for a while and just have some really amazing things going on. You were definitely a standout in this community of, Edmonton that I'm finding as far as just everything you got going on. To me, it seems a little bit more progressive than some of the more perhaps older established community or sober houses and such as well. So definitely a standout, and I've really enjoyed following you guys. And we'll get into where we can follow you and such online. And also, people that I have listeners that are outside of Edmonton. But you know what? I just remembered, like, for my personal recovery, I would have loved to have heard a podcast like this about what is the actual inner workings, the process of getting into one of these sober houses, recovery houses and such. And it just would have been a great resource for me at the time. So that's kind of what the other thing I'm forecasting is, that some people will be able to get value regardless if they're in the Edmonton area or not. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking to do today. And of course, give you a chance to say of any other upcoming events or ways to donate and things that you guys are looking for. So that's a little overview of some of the topics we want to get into. But Kim, I'd really like to know a little bit about your background. Like, what was your path that led you into the work that you're doing nowadays?
Yeah, for sure. So I came from a human resources background, and about, 13 years ago now or so, I was in that field and I did event planning kind of on the side. And so I was planning an event for a restaurant chain and needed a charity of choice. I Googled, I had never, wasn't really attached to any sort of charity or organization. And I actually came across the Zebra Child Protection Center. So they were a child advocacy center in Edmonton. And I kind of stumbled into the nonprofit world. So I went down that path and became a volunteer and then became a staff member and spent a decade with them actually. And really found that nonprofit organizations really worked well with my heart and soul. And being able to help kids and youth throughout kind of the continuum of their trauma and their recovery really worked well for me. So after a decade, that was a lot of child abuse that was listened to, lots of beautiful, rewarding stories and great work, but also a lot of it was a very trauma-soaked environment. So I started looking elsewhere. And so I had a dear friend who had sent this application when our house was looking for an executive director. And I didn't see any correlation initially. Why are you sending this to me? How could this actually go together? And then I kind of started the recruitment process a little bit, and very quickly, kind of that same heartstring got tugged when you realize that as a residential addiction recovery center, we have 60 men who live with us and embark on a 1-year program to go through their recovery. And so seeing the bravery that they had to take these steps forward, this is a completely voluntary program. They are choosing to take this step in their life. I was kind of hooked right from the beginning. So as a nonprofit, it spoke to that for me. As a very established organization, it's been around since 1984. We're in our third location. So this is certainly the largest, both in land size and in the number of clients that we support. But ultimately, it was the men who drew me into this. I came for a quiet tour with the board member during the recruitment process and barely made it in the door when a lovely, lovely gentleman came up and shook our hands and then told me his name and said that our house had saved his life, and then went back to making his coffee.
Wow.
So it's very powerful, and there's a lot of really great really great work that happens from the clients that are here and from the staff. And so I feel very lucky to have landed here.
It's amazing. And so, sorry, how long have you been at part of our house? So you did the decade with Zebra, and now you've been with our house for.
Since February of this year, so about
Oh,
10
wow.
months or so, yeah.
So coming up on your your 1 year. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Very cool story. Thanks for giving the background.
Yeah.
And I imagine there's a lot of, your experience, as you said, that you didn't necessarily see a correlation right away, but I imagine there's a lot of your previous experience that can be transferred over. As far as, when people have these addictions, but there's a reason that they have these addictions, and it often is rooted in some form of trauma or something that they haven't necessarily investigated in themselves. So I imagine it was a fairly smooth transition in that sense, as far as you being able to bring your skill set forward. Is that correct?
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, when we look at adverse childhood experiences, and we look at ACE scores, and we look at childhood trauma, development within the brain. I mean, all of this kind of speaks to the experiences that a lot of the men have had. So while in my previous life, the continuum was kind of through childhood and adolescence, this is kind of just continuing down that spectrum a little further. So I think it gave me a
Yeah.
good foundation.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I just love it. So this is something that you've been drawn to, as far as, like you mentioned, the tugging of the heartstrings. Is that
Yeah.
sort of the filter, or the the litmus test is, okay, I'm doing something that's worthwhile if I have that kind of inner warmth or, sensation in my body? Is that sort of is that the filter which you make decisions through generally?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, it was something that I didn't really have to think about until I started looking elsewhere for another job.
Oh,
And it wasn't
yeah.
even really something that when I was looking to leave Zebra that I would have even considered. I was like, yeah, I don't think I need nonprofit.
Yeah.
And then by the time I pulled about 5 job applications and all of them were nonprofits, it kind of spoke to that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think working in a trauma environment in a leadership position, you have an obligation to the organization and to those that you serve and to yourself to really look at what wellness looks like. And so for
Mm.
me, that's being attuned to the nervous system and what feels right. I mean, there's lots of research out there that says our body speaks for us, sometimes before we're willing to hear it.
Yeah.
So I think that, I mean, I was certainly drawn to this work. And you look around in the staff, nonprofit's not an easy place to work. Nobody does this work for the money. Then you layer on the fact that it's addictions, and that's very difficult. You layer on the fact that it's adult male addictions, which is yet another layer. And then obviously it's a trauma-filled environment.
Mhm.
And so you look around and you've got no shortage of good people doing really good work. And that's just at the staff. And you look at the guys who are doing the best they can, and whatever version of success that looks like to them. But they came through our door. And I think that that is a under-recognized stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. As we get further into the whole idea of the stigma of addiction and such, from my perspective, anyways, I'd be interested to see what you say. It's come a long way about getting more normalized, and less people are generally getting less fearful about putting their hand up for that, which is great, but there of course is still a long ways to go as well. So let's talk about it. So you said there's 60 people doing a full-time program for a year. Amazing. I'm just curious, where are the other locations? Are they in and around Alberta, or?
So we are a standalone facility. So there are certainly other addiction recovery centers within the Edmonton zone and the province, but our House Addiction Recovery Center is solely at our site.
Wow, very cool. I
Yeah.
love that. And then, yeah, so tell me a little bit more about, you mentioned it's volunteer, as far as like these 60 men have put their hand up, as you mentioned, walk through, literally and metaphorically, through the door of recovery, so to speak. So what does that process look like? I guess the first, a few questions to unpack that. Yeah, as far as the admission process goes, is there like a wait list? Is capacity 60 people? What can you tell us a little bit more about that, if somebody's listening to this going, wow, this sounds like a great thing, and they want to put their hand up?
Yeah, for sure. Matt, I'm going to take this great opportunity to introduce you to Angie. So she
Yes.
is our program manager.
Excellent.
And so Angie was formerly our intake
Hello, Angie.
manager as well. So she is by far our clinical expert. So she'll be able to speak to all of that for you.
Excellent. Hello, Angie. I believe we met on the call before with you in Brooklyn, correct?
Yeah.
Excellent. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for joining.
So our intake, your question about intake. So normally our wait list is anywhere from 20 to 50 people constantly. When a bed gets freed up, it fills right away. So we don't have what you would call, most people would call an intake date. Ours is just a constant. Like if the bed's empty, we fill it like the emergency is now. So we do kind of roll through our waiting list. Clients have to have completed a short-term residential program within the last 2 years that is 19 days or longer. The reason why we ask for that is because if I said to you, you're coming in for recovery for the very first time, and I'm going to put you into our house and you're going to work on yourself for a year and you're going to do step work and meetings and get a sponsor, they're going to be like, no way. Like, and failing sometimes is worse than even trying in the first place, right? So we get them to do the short term so that they can understand what treatment is and what is expected of them and how it's going to look. And then they can decide if a 1-year treatment center is for them.
That's a great way to do it. Like you say, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Sometimes, failing can be much worse. And then there's all the extra shame and everything else that gets piled on, right? And much less likely to try it again because like, oh, that didn't work, or, whatever it may be, or just fearful of it happening again, right? So I think that's a great system. Very cool to hear that it's just like one bed is like one person's out, new person in. What is the dynamic of that with folks? Because I imagine there is a degree of people that get very comfortable with each other, almost like a family-like atmosphere. And then for someone to leave out of that and a new person come in, seems like an interesting dynamic. How does that settle, or how does that work?
For I'd say 90% of the time, it goes really, really well. Like the guys that have been here 6, 7, 8 months, they help the newcomer come in, help them get adjusted. The first 30 days for a newcomer is really tough, right? So if they don't have that support, they tend to want to run. But the guys are super helpful. There is times where somebody will come in and it rocks the house a little bit if they're too negative or stuff like that. It has rocked the house, but not to the point of like, they'll say words to each other, but usually that's the extent of how it goes, right? It's surprising because they go from 18 to whatever age. We've had people in here 7, 8 years old, and it actually works super well. They'll end up getting comfortable with maybe a group on this side of the room or whatever that looks like, but at the end of the day, they all pretty much get along pretty well.
And I think 60 is a really great number. I think it happened to be just because of the size that our facility can hold. But I think it's kind of the perfect number in that it's not too big where everybody is just a number. Everybody is still very much a person. It's still very personable and client-centered, but it's not small enough where everybody is interacting with the exact same people every day. So you can have your little bit of groups, you can have your space, personalities can exist. It seems to be a number that works really well.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. That's kind of that sweet spot, and just like you say, happenstance by the amount of property and the size that you have, it just worked out perfectly, it sounds like.
When you say that family component of it, there is a very big family component of it, right? Not even just with the clients, but with the staff. And when we have to be professional, we're professional, but we can go down there and play a game of crib with them and like joke with them.
Very
and
cool.
We call each other brothers. And if somebody's got to go to the hospital, they've got their hand up to get them there. So it is a very close, you think 60, how can it be? But it actually is.
Yeah, I could see that. Well, it's like, we'll get into some of the dynamics of the program itself, because it is a full-time, right? So the people are living there. How is it for as far as like, is there family visitation? Is there allowance of like, if somebody's in school or has something else going on, what does that look like? Or is it as an immersive, you're here for the year, or in the case of the short term, you're here for the 21 days? What does that look like as far as, outside visitors, for example? We'll start there.
So it looks a little bit different for people. So when they're first coming in for the first 30 days, they cannot leave unless they have a client that's been there 3 months or longer to escort them. And that's just because they're high risk, and it's about them reaching out and asking for help because it's not a normal thing for them to do. So we make them kind of do that, right?
Right.
They can have visitors starting from day one, from 4:30 until 10 o'clock, and on the weekends it can be until midnight. They have to stay in the main building, but they can have family, friends come and visit at the day one.
Very cool.
After their 30 days, they can go out for passes on the weekends. They sign it. They have to go somewhere safe. We have to have the contact, all of that information to make sure they're okay. As far as the clients coming in, working, if you're a brand new client coming in, we tell them after 6 months or longer, you can work evenings and weekends. However, we highly suggest that you do not, because this is not a light program. It's constant work on yourself, right? So if we were to ask any individual to come in and you're going to work on yourself 5 days a week for 6 hours a day, that's really hard work. So it's better that they concentrate on themselves. However, we have dads and stuff come in and say, look, I got to pay child support. So they'll work with their counselor to say, like, is it possible for me to work? And we'll talk as a team to say, you know what, I don't think it's a good time for him right now. Let's give him another month. We also have a post-grad program. So sometimes they graduate, they come back, maybe they've fallen, money's been a trigger, work's been a trigger, how to balance everything. So we will let them, after a month or so, to work. So that they can figure out what that balance looks like, why they're in a safe place, and then carry it back outside to be more successful.
Amazing. Yeah, it sounds very like so much thought has been put into it. And I imagine the more people you cycle through, you can refine it depending on what works, right? So there's a lot of allowance of nuance depending on a person's personal situation, basically, right? So very cool stuff. Just some, I guess, some basic questions. For me, I'm just curious about like, what would I be allowed to bring in? Like if I've been accepted and I'm allowed to come in, how much of your personal belongings are you supposed to kind of bow out of, like social media? You know what I mean? Things like this, I'm thinking of like, what does that look like if I were to put my hand up and, get accepted in and such? What would that look like for me as far as what can I bring? Just little details like that.
So I usually tell them, you can bring a towel, a couple towels, your own sheets and pillows and blankets if you like, and that feels most comfortable. A TV, no bigger than 42 inches. And then, any of their, shampoos, any of their personal belongings that way. No big furniture, because our facility used to be an old hotel. So
cool.
It's just kind of big enough for them to have a little bit of their own space, their beds, dressers. Not big enough for them to bring in their own dressers and lamps, and although sometimes they do. Cell phones, they are allowed them, not during programming time. The reason for that, I know other treatment centers, none of them allow it, but for us, we're a year long. So if we take their phone for a year and then we say, okay, here you go, you're going to go out into the real world, and here's a phone that you haven't had, and media and all that, they've got to be able to learn to balance it properly in their lives. Same with gaming systems. We do allow them to bring them, but they have to play them in the main building on the weekends and Tuesday evenings only. So again, they learn balance, but we don't take everything away from them, because then they're going to be like a kid getting candy for the first time, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a good analogy, actually. Yeah, for sure. So I'd love to just get into the actual program itself. What does that look like as far as, like, I'm envisioning, is there like, community workouts? Like, is there a gym around? I know that from what I've seen on your Instagram feed and such, there's definitely events that you have going on. What does that look like? What does a program essentially look like as far as like the full-time, is there like some counseling involved, group coaching? What does it look like?
So they're to wake up at 7 o'clock, get their shower, make their bed, get themselves ready. They come in for a medication at 7:30, at 8, and have their breakfast. At 8 o'clock, we have a morning program, and that can look different depending on what they like. So we have prayer groups, smudging, they could go for a walk, we got meditation. It doesn't matter to us which one they want, as long as they go to something that starts their day off in a positive way.
Cool.
From 8:20 to 9 o'clock is their time to kind of, get their coffee, do whatever they want. Then they go into a module. All of our modules are based on CBD and trauma informed, and they're led by addiction counselors. So that is the first 2 hours of the morning. Lunchtime is at 11 o'clock. From 11 until 1:30 is their time to they'll have a nap, or they'll go to appointments or shopping, their free time. 1:30 to 3:30 can look a little different in a given day. So some days it's step work, some days it's a big house cleanup, some days it's a team meeting with the clients. So called a house meeting. It's where any concerns are brought up for them on their side, on our side. We have rec. So sometimes we take them out and do like physical activities or sports with them, or sometimes we'll bring in paint night, paint day, or whatever that looks like, but something recreational. Playing cards, we'll have crib tournaments, pool tournaments, stuff like that to get them to interact with each other. We have mentor time, so that somebody that's been in the house 3 months or longer will be attached to a newcomer, so that person, there's allowed at time to like ask any questions, go over the rules, or play cards, or just have that one person that you can go and feel comfortable talking to right off the hop. They have 3 meetings a week, so we hold meetings here in the house. Required to get a sponsor, do their step work, and then the weekends are free for them to go to their families, or their family to come. So it's a pretty full day, basically from 7:30 in the morning until 3:30 in the afternoon, and then they get a break. And 3 days a week they have to attend meetings.
Very cool. Very cool. What I love to hear about is like it's definitely sounds like it's very holistic as far as, you have the meditation, you have some group immersions or activities, you got the physicality of some workouts, and some one-on-ones, there's some alone time, so there's that full body, and then of course the meetings, right? So a very full-bodied approach, which I found has been the most successful, for me personally. Like the meetings were great, but I also felt that there was a lot of different things that I needed to start incorporating into my life. Specifically, curiously enough, like that whole yin side of it, like the yoga and the things I always had in my periphery, but I was kind of like, maybe when I'm older or later. And now that I've been doing it, I'm like, oh, this was like the missing ingredient. So it's really cool that you have been integrating that into it. How long was it to develop, to get into like that program and just realize, okay, this is what is really working for people? Because I imagine there's like, there is a lot of different personalities, and perhaps there's some, pushback or fear when you get into that whole like introspection part through meditation and that sort of thing. So, I guess more of a topic of conversation. I don't necessarily know if there's a question other than, like how long did it sort of take to get that program into that sweet spot that you were talking about?
I think because our house has been around since 1984. I mean, when you go all the way back to that, our house was founded through the generosity of the church. And so it looked very different than it does now.
Sure, yeah.
So kind of historically, a few years later, there was a mutual kind of split from the church to be able to provide support to those from any faith. Still very strongly supported by the church, but just in a different capacity. Our first location was a house that had rooms, and it was open to both genders. They very quickly learned that was not a fit. And so the decision was made to support men because that's where the need was greater. So the second location had more rooms, but was also, as the first, located near inner city Edmonton. And so in about 2014, they made the decision to purchase property through the generosity of Homeward Trust on the west end of Edmonton. So we are the last stop in Edmonton. I had to Google if we were in the city or the county when I came out here, but we're on 3.5 acres.
Wow.
So it allows us to have separate facilities for the client's residents. So they're in shared rooms, like Angie had mentioned. We've kind of got an operations space where our staff and counselors can work. And then we've kind of got the common space area as well. But what we're able to see on 3.5 acres, which I think is really special and speaks more to the holistic component that you had mentioned, is like there's grass, there's trees. We have a massive garden in the back that's planted and intended to from the clients. Our neighbors to the west, perhaps, is a farmer's field.
No
So
way.
you'll hear the coyotes at night. And
True.
so there's that sense of space. So I think from a nature perspective, there's also great grounding in that.
Yeah.
Also the logistics. It takes effort to get out to us. So I think
Mm.
from a lifestyle, reflective, transformative perspective for our clients, that's also a good thing, because it could perhaps give some distance between temptations and old habits.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good space for them to be able to start taking these steps.
Yeah.
And
Really
just
great.
to add on to what Kim said, I don't know if there is a sweet spot, because with addiction and trauma and humans, it's always changing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always talking about what can we bring in to make it more successful, to make them more successful. What can we bring in that's going to make them want to have recovery and be in recovery? So I don't think there is a sweet spot. I think it's just a constant like moving to what's going to be best practice.
Okay, interesting. So there's the potential. It's such a fluid program that there's the potential if you're, and I guess what's the process look like for that? Is there a monthly check-in with the men that are staying there? Hey, what's working for you? What's not working for you? Adjusting on the fly? Like, is it just that fluid where you're like, okay, we're going to give some more time outside, or like not necessarily? Or is there like some structure that like, hey, we're going to run this for a year. We'll make some adjustments. Like how would you accomplish what you were mentioning, Angie, versus, you know what I mean? Like, do you get the question?
Matt, I think that you had mentioned before kind of the societal views on addictions, and I think that plays a lot into it.
Mm,
And organizationally, I mean, you kind of have to go with the ebbs and flows that naturally occur. So I came into this position in February. It's a new opportunity when new leadership comes in to look at things through a different light and to see things from a different perspective. Angie's new to this position, not new to our house, so that also gives it a different lens.
yeah,
So I
sure.
think there's such great opportunity that comes there. So I think those are kind of the moments that an organization can naturally start
Cool.
asking the questions and look to things.
Yeah.
We received, as many of the Edmonton zone addiction and recovery centers, we received an increase in funding from Alberta Health Services.
Wow.
So we are still a nonprofit. However, we do receive funding from Alberta Health Services. And so there's some things that we're able to align with from their programming perspective. So bringing forward their My Recovery plan that is going
Right.
Alberta wide is something. So that obviously has some impact to our
Of
programming.
course, yeah.
Being able to look at things from a more holistic perspective. So we very recently brought in Twisted Oak Yoga and Wellness at the client's request, which was the best part of it,
Very cool.
to be doing in-person yoga classes. So again, looking to other people within that community of practice, what do their programs look like? What are successes? We had a lovely meeting with New Roads out of Victoria, who are doing some really amazing work. So it's that collaborative conversation within the community, and then having a really great grounding of what our clients' needs are as best as we can through including them and their feedback to really put forward the best options.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I love the picture you painted there and just the collaborative nature, and all the different elements that you're bringing in. So very, very cool. Also of note, yeah, I noticed that too, like on, again, on the Instagram feed, just the, like the garden and things of that nature really speaks. It really has some impact, and it's cool that again, the setting that you give them, the environment of which you're located at, I imagine has such a big, impact on people, right? Which is really cool. I'm gonna go back into, we talked a little bit about like, the community and being a nonprofit and such. What is something that people can do that's listening to this that would like to get involved somehow, whether it's volunteering or donations? What's the easiest way to reach out to you and figure out what you guys need and that sort of thing?
Sending an email or picking up the phone. Our host doesn't have a formalized volunteer program. So that's something we're going to be working on next year, but really making sure that there's meaningful tasks and work for those who are generous in donating their time from the community. There's no shortage of things that we can use, both in having somebody that's going to come out and help weed the garden, or somebody who happens to have some extra gravel that we can pour on the back road.
Sure. Yeah.
And then all the way to people that are that have a skill set, who could perhaps offer some lived experience stories to our clients, or some teachings that they may have, all the way down to the very basics. A dentist office who has extra toothbrushes that they'd like to donate.
Sure.
Because we're residential, as our name reflects, this is the home for 60 men for a year. And so the same way that you would be taking care of your home or outfitting your home, that's the same perspective for us. So down to toilet paper and brooms and dust pans. I mean, it gets all the way into that minutia, again, all the way up to if people are able to come and donate a specific skill set. So reaching out on our website, through an email or phone call, or through social media would be the best way to get engaged with us. And sometimes just asking, what do you need? Great place to start.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Yes. So we're at time of recording here. We're winding down in 2022. Is there anything you can disclose? Is there any events coming up in 2023, collaborations, anything coming up?
There is. So in February of next year, we will be helping support a group called Living Beyond Victims of Addiction. So it is mirrored off of the Edmonton Victims of Homicide Society support group, with the intention of filling that unfortunate niche of community members who have lost a loved one to addictions. So this will be an in-person support group. There will be a psychoeducational component every month, as well as an opportunity for kind of this community to develop and to naturally take off. So our house is championing the program. It is created and it is led by community members for community members. It is located downtown. The meeting space has been generously donated from a local organization. And so in the new year, we will be launching a website. So have a look for Living Beyond Victims of Addiction in the new year.
That is beautiful. Wow, that's powerful. So coming soon. And we'll definitely, I'll get some of that information that we can put in the show notes as well, moving forward. So that's wonderful. Yeah, such exciting things going on for our house. I'm just so fortunate that you both came on today. A couple just sort of one-off questions as we wind things down here. So if that being a nonprofit, I guess, what is the process as far as when is there a cost of admission? Is there like some funding? Is there again, I guess the admission part, what is it that would come up if somebody wanted to get in there? Is it partially covered by perhaps Alberta Health? What does that process look like?
So every Albertan can come in, every male Albertan can come into our treatment facility being funded by AHS.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
AHS will cover the cost for them to come. So even if they're on EI, ACE, Alberta Works, it doesn't matter. So that they can still be able to not have the stress of paying their bills outside of here.
Wow.
Still have that money to do that while all of their needs are met in here, as well as their recovery and getting them back on the road to be successful again.
Amazing. That is truly amazing. What have you found to be like the success rate after leaving the house? Like, do people keep in touch when they go back out into the wild? You know what I mean? Or is it's like, do people come back? Do they have an opportunity to come back? Or is it like after you're out, perhaps there should be some distance? What does that look like?
I think that statistics are really important because they certainly help tell the story. But I think that whenever we're talking really about anything with addiction, we've got to understand that it's so much more than a stat. So yes, we can pull the numbers and see, well, how many of these men have made it to 1 year and have gone through graduation and we never see them again for what we're going to assume is the right reason. To me, that's not the fulsome story on what success looks like. So there are some men who come in who don't make it to that 1 year. You have to look at kind of that anecdotal piece as well to be able to say, did they get a number of the skills that they need? Are they still clean in their recovery? And if they don't, are they able and willing to walk through our doors again? Angie had mentioned our post-grad program that speaks to men who are coming back for a second or a third or a fourth time. So to me, that is success because they know that they can come in. If you're looking at it purely from an analytical perspective, well, it's not. They had a relapse. So I think we've got to be really careful what we define as success. And Angie can certainly speak more to what the connection points for our clients with our house look like.
Yeah, so when I started here over 5 years ago now, we didn't do too much with outreach, and odd one would come back. I was a big part of like, what do you mean you're leaving and you're not going to call me again? Like, that doesn't seem to make sense. I need to still be your counselor, right? Not as a once a week thing, but maybe every 2 weeks at first, or every 3 weeks, and then every month, and then until they're kind of, and until life gets complicated and they need somebody to talk to again, right? So that is offered to anybody that graduates our house. We do not cut that counseling off if they need it. Same with families. I also started that, like, it's not like a part of the program yet. I mean, hopefully somewhere down the road, but families that are struggling with how do I deal when they come out of treatment, or how do I deal with the trauma that they caused before they come into treatment. So I've brought families of our clients in, and it's been very successful too, because it helps if everybody's on board to look at everything, right? So we do offer a lot of that outreach, not quite funded, but we sneak it in there nevertheless.
Right.
It's important.
Absolutely. No, and Kim, I like what you said too, and it's a topic that comes up on my show a lot. And I use a sports analogy one time. Like if a sporting team has like 30 wins in a row and then they lose once, it's not dogpile and just focus on the loss, right? If there's all these wins and victories and there's a relapse, the last thing that I would want to do to myself is like really dogpile on myself and just add all that shame and guilt and I'm a failure and all that inner dialogue. So yeah, for you to mention that, like just to kind of the topic of relapse and reframing a relapse and what is success, right? Is it beyond a statistic? So I'm glad that you got more abstract than just the binary numbers. So absolutely, it's very important that to mention that. So thanks for bringing that up. I guess the one final question I have is the men aspect of it. And Kim, you had mentioned something that was you sort of viewed that there was more of an opportunity for that. So for me, just from my perspective, from the different communities that I'm in, it seems that there's a lot more women. This is my perspective, that have their hand up and are like doing the recovering out loud thing. And definitely still have to search for and look for the men. And even the men that are doing that, it's sort of underneath a layer. It's not quite as, hey, I'm doing this. So is there still sort of a stigma, or is it like the male archetype that we don't ask for help? Or is there still some of those old stories that are perhaps in the way? And then I guess part two of that is like, is that identifying those older stories, is that how you came to the idea that there was more opportunity to help men?
Well, like I had mentioned, that decision to decide on that gender was, that was 1986. That was some years ago. Yeah, and it was
okay. Yeah, fair enough.
But I think in regards to stigma, I think addiction and mental health really go hand in hand. And you look at those conversations, and countless times the analogy of, if you break a foot and you have a cast on, somebody's going to hold the door open for you and ask you how you're doing and engage in that story. If you have somebody who has an addiction, they're not given that same space often. And so that's why I will continuously and very much believe, like, the bravery of the men who come forward, it's not an easy thing for anybody to ask for help. And due to gender norms, it is often not easy for men to do that. And so when Angie's talking about going through a treatment facility before they come to us, this isn't even the first time they've asked for help, which for some people may make it easier. And some people, I don't think it does, because you're in another position where you need to ask for help. So I think we as a culture within our house put a lot of effort into making sure that it is there's no judgment attached to anything, and that everybody's okay to feel what they feel. We're not going to lessen somebody's response that, yeah, like, I'm super ashamed that I am here. That is valid. That's where our clinical team is fantastic in working through those in the modules and then the one-on-one. I think that our house has a role in the community to try and engage those conversations with community members from an education standpoint, from an awareness standpoint, and really that reminder that addiction doesn't discriminate between gender, it does not discriminate in age, and it doesn't discriminate in societal class. So this can happen to anybody. And I think even when you look from a supporting perspective, there's also a bit of hesitancy sometimes to even say, yes, I have somebody who has lived experience in my life. But I think if everybody can really kind of take a look, you can kind of see some of those addiction qualities in most people's lives. So really taking that assessment and just recognizing that these men are doing an incredibly brave thing, ultimately because they want to better themselves, which will therefore benefit society. So
and just to follow up on Kim's, when you asked about the difference between men and women, it's easy for women to say, I have a mental health problem, or I'm depressed, or I have anxiety, right? Because that's socially accepted. It's not so easy for them to say I'm an addict, because they have to hold that family together and everything about it. For a man, it's easy to them to say I'm an addict. I don't have mental health, depression, anxiety. What are you talking about? That makes me seem weak, but I'm okay to say I'm an addict.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, sure. That's really well articulated. Interesting stuff. Yeah, for sure. Very cool. I've been very much enjoyed this conversation with both you ladies. Thank you so much for coming on today. Just as we wind down here, what would be the easiest way to reach out to you both, or either one of you, anybody at our house? Is it an email? Is it through your website, Instagram, Facebook? What's the easiest way to get a hold of you guys?
I would say website, and then through social media channels. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, we're on there. And there's phone numbers and email addresses that can get you to us.
Beautiful. Nice and easy. I'll put all of those in the show notes. And yeah, just final thoughts. Can be whatever, whether it's just a piece of advice or whatever both of you have found that has worked the best, whether you want to say the mission statement of our house, really anything. Final thoughts from you, Kim.
First of all, thank you very much for putting forward the offer and then for hosting us today. I agree, this was a very lovely conversation. I would just kind of kick off before I hand over to Angie. The holiday season can be very triggering and very tricky for people for a lot of different reasons. Coming into this world of addiction and recovery, I happen to find the holiday season very joyful. It's complex for a lot of people. So I think being able to recognize that everybody's doing the best that they can with what they have, and just trying to find the generosity and support for those, and understanding that the holidays are not always a happy time for people.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kim. Angie.
I also wanted to thank you for having us on here. The last note I'd like to leave is, I've talked to many families and many people with addiction, and a lot of them are so confused of where to start. Where do I start to get help? How do I? And to know that they can reach out to us at any time. They don't have to have a short-term treatment to reach out to us, and we will guide them in the way. So whether it's a husband calling for a wife, or a wife calling for a husband or son or uncle, we will help them take the next steps of what they need. Like they don't have to just call us because they've got all the qualifications to come in here. We can just help them.
Ah, that's beautiful. That's very important. I'm glad that you mentioned that at the end here, Angie. So thank you so much to both of you. Happy holidays. Doing some wonderful stuff. It was absolute privilege, pleasure to have you both on today. Our House, just so much great stuff coming up. And yeah, everything, look in the show notes. You have that collaboration coming up in February, Living Beyond Victims of Addiction. And thank you so much to both of you. If there's any event that you'd like to promote, in 2023, anytime in the future, the door is always open to come back on the show.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you.